All right, so we're diving right in. You wanted to learn more about judging others
Hmm.
and, why we shouldn't do it. And,
Yeah.
and you sent some super interesting stuff for us to go through both religious and secular perspectives on this. It's
Hmm.
like you handed us this whole toolkit for building compassion.
I love that.
Yeah. So I'm ready to dig into this.
Let's go.
So in this deep dive, we are going to try to understand where judgment comes from,
Okay.
what the Bible has to say about it, and most importantly, how we can use all this wisdom and apply it to our own lives.
I'm really interested in this idea of judgment being almost like a human instinct.
Oh, totally. I catch myself making snap judgments like all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like just yesterday, I saw someone walking down the street in those toe shoes,
Uh-huh.
and I'll be honest, my first thought was not very charitable.
It's so funny because that is such a perfect example of how, like, ingrained judgment is in our wiring.
Yeah.
Like, if you think about it from an evolutionary
Yeah.
perspective, our brains are designed to very quickly assess situations and people,
Right.
friend or foe, safe or dangerous.
Right.
But those quick judgments, as helpful as they might have been for survival, back in the caveman days,
Totally.
they aren't always so accurate in our
No.
modern world,
Yeah.
and they can definitely lead us down the wrong path.
For sure. One of the articles that you sent in pointed out that a lot of the time we're judging based on like a tiny sliver of information.
Right.
It's like seeing one frame of a movie and trying to figure out the whole plot.
Exactly.
We don't have the full picture, and yet we're so quick to like form these opinions.
And you know what else is really fascinating? Is that a lot of our sources talk about how societal influences really shape our judgments too.
Oh, yeah.
So think about all the messages we get
Yeah.
from the media, from our families,
Yeah.
from our culture.
Totally.
All of that can create unconscious biases that we might not even be aware of.
Oh, that's so true. And I've been thinking a lot lately about how the media often portrays certain groups in a very negative light.
Right.
And it makes me wonder, how much that unconscious bias, like, seeps into my own judgments. It's a little unsettling when you start to kind of peel back those layers.
It really is.
Yeah.
And this is where I think the Bible's perspective can be so helpful.
Okay.
Remember that classic line from Matthew 7:1 to 2?
Yeah.
Judge, not that you be not judged.
Yes.
That's a very simple statement, but it just cuts right to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we're not God.
Yeah.
We're not the ultimate judge.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because honestly, that verse has always felt a little tricky to me.
Okay.
Does that mean we can never call out wrongdoing?
That's a really good question.
Yeah.
And it's something that a lot of people wrestle with.
Right.
And I think it's important to remember that judging someone's character and holding them accountable for their actions are two very different things.
Okay.
For example, you could address a friend's harmful behavior without writing them off as a bad person.
Gotcha.
The key is to approach the situation with love and a desire for understanding rather than condemnation.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm still curious about those times when we are tempted to judge even when we know we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Like when we see someone making choices that seem harmful or self-destructive, what do we do with those feelings?
Well, that's where I think the concept of empathy comes in.
Okay.
One of our sources described empathy as the ability to step into someone else's shoes
Okay.
and to try to see the world from their perspective, even if we don't agree with their choices.
Right.
It's not about condoning bad behavior.
Yeah.
It's about trying to understand those underlying factors that might be driving it.
So instead of saying they're making terrible choices, we try to understand what might have led them to that point.
Exactly. Maybe they're struggling with something we don't know about. Maybe they're carrying burdens we can't even imagine. And when we approach them with empathy, we create a space for genuine connection and understanding.
You mentioned earlier that judging someone's character is different from adjusting their actions.
Right.
How do we actually do that in a way that's both effective and compassionate?
There's actually some really practical guidance in the Bible on this.
Okay.
1 Thessalonians 5:14 talks about warning those who are disorderly,
Okay.
but also comforting and supporting them.
Okay.
So it's about finding that balance between calling out wrongdoing and offering a helping hand.
So it's like tough love, but with an extra dose of grace.
Exactly. And then Matthew 18:15-17 outlines a process for addressing sin within the church community.
Okay.
So it starts with a private conversation and then involves others if needed,
Uh-huh.
but always with the goal of restoration, not punishment.
Right.
And what's interesting is that those same principles can be applied to conflict resolution in any relationship.
Wow, I never thought about applying those verses outside of like a church context.
Yeah.
But that makes a lot of sense.
Right. It's about approaching the situation with humility and recognizing that we're all capable of making mistakes, and then seeking a resolution that honors both parties involved.
Okay, so we've talked about those evolutionary roots of judgment and then those societal influences that shape our perceptions, and even some biblical guidance on how to deal with those sticky situations where judgment just wants to kind of creep in.
Right.
But what about those times when we're just flat out confused?
Yeah.
Like when we see someone going through something incredibly difficult and we can't understand why,
Right.
it's easy to fall into the trap of judging their circumstances or questioning their faith, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And that brings us to the story of Job.
Yeah.
Job's story is so powerful because it's like it shows us how limited our human perspective can be.
Yeah.
Here's this guy who's described as blameless and upright,
Right.
yet he suffers immense loss and pain.
Yeah.
And I think it's easy for us to look at a situation like that and be like, well, what did he do to deserve this?
Right.
Or even judge his faith during his struggles.
Totally.
But the book of Job doesn't give us any easy answers.
Right.
Instead, it points to a truth that can be hard to swallow.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just don't understand the bigger picture.
That's a tough one to grasp, especially when you're the one, going through the struggle. It's so
Mhm.
easy to ask, like, why is this happening?
Exactly.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or to feel like, we're being punished or that life just isn't
Yeah.
fair.
Absolutely. And that's where I think faith comes in.
Okay.
Not as a way to, like, explain away suffering,
Yeah.
but as a source of strength and comfort when we're facing the unknown.
Okay.
One of the sources you sent put it so beautifully. It said that prayer is our most powerful tool when things don't make sense.
Mm.
It's a way to surrender our limited understanding and connect with a source of wisdom and love that's far greater than ourselves.
That is a really beautiful way to put it. So instead of getting stuck in the why of suffering,
Yeah.
we can turn to prayer for like solace and guidance.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And another thing that really struck me from the sources was this idea that judging others actually reflects a lack of self-awareness.
Wow.
When we're so quick to point out the flaws in other people,
Yeah.
a lot of times it means that we're blind to our own shortcomings. It's like we're projecting our own insecurities and unresolved issues onto everyone around us.
Whoa, that's like a real gut punch moment, isn't it?
It is.
Like, it makes
Yeah.
me think about how often I might be judging other people for things that I also struggle with.
Right. And that's why humility is so crucial in this whole journey of choosing compassion over judgment.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging that we're all imperfect. We all make mistakes, and we all need grace.
Okay, so we've talked about how deeply ingrained judgment is, and how those societal pressures play a role. We even talked about how to deal with those messy situations where judgment just wants to rear its ugly head.
Right.
We've even touched on the idea that sometimes we're just not meant to understand everything. But let's get practical here. What are some concrete steps that we can take to actually shift from judgment to compassion?
I love that you're asking that because our sources had some fantastic advice on this.
Okay.
One of the secular pieces said this amazing phrase, choose to see the good.
I love that.
It's about actively looking for the positive in others, even when it's hidden beneath the surface.
Yeah, it's like we're training our brains to focus on the good
Yes.
instead of automatically jumping to the negative.
Exactly. And this isn't about being naive
Right.
or ignoring red flags. It's about making a conscious effort to see the best in people, to assume good intentions, and to approach every interaction with a spirit of generosity.
That reminds me of something from our religious source, Romans 2.1. It says, "Therefore you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are, who judge for in whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself for you who judge practice the same things."
Wow.
It's a powerful reminder that we're all in the same boat.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, this leads to another important step in cultivating compassion, recognizing our own flaws.
Yeah.
When we acknowledge our own imperfections, it becomes a lot harder to judge other people harshly.
It's like that saying, when you point one finger, there are three pointing back at you.
Exactly. So instead of pointing fingers, we should be extending a hand of grace and understanding, just as Christ did for us.
Yeah.
We're called to embody that same kind of love, a love that's patient, kind, and forgiving.
Our sources suggested some other practical ways to cultivate compassion, too.
Yeah.
Things like praying for others, practicing humility, and being an encourager.
Those are such powerful actions.
Right.
Think about it. When we pray for someone, We're shifting our focus from their flaws to their needs.
Mm-hmm.
We're opening ourselves up to seeing them through God's eyes.
And when we practice humility, we're acknowledging that we don't have all the answers, that we're still learning and growing, and that we need grace just as much as anyone else.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And being an encourager, that's all about lifting others up, celebrating their victories, and offering support during difficult times.
You know, it's funny, all of these things sound so simple,
Right.
yet they can have such a profound impact on our relationships and our overall well-being. It's like
Yeah.
we're literally rewiring our brains for kindness and compassion.
It really is a process of rewiring, of transforming our thought patterns and behaviors.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy. We're human, we're going to slip up.
Yeah.
But the key is to keep striving, keep practicing, keep reminding ourselves of these truths that we're unpacking.
So to bring it all back to our listeners, what would you say is like the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think the most important takeaway is that choosing compassion over judgment is a conscious choice.
Okay.
It's a daily practice, a commitment to seeing the world through a different lens.
Right.
It's about recognizing those automatic judgmental thoughts and intentionally replacing them with thoughts of empathy, understanding, and love.
That's such a powerful reminder. It's not about being perfect. It's about progress.
Yeah.
It's about constantly striving to be more like Christ in our interactions with others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, it's not just about personal growth. Choosing compassion also has a ripple effect on the world around us.
Oh.
One of the sources put it beautifully. It said that when we choose compassion, we become agents of healing and reconciliation.
Wow, that's a beautiful thought. It makes me think about how every act of kindness, no matter how small, can make a difference.
It really can. And when we choose to see the good in others, to offer grace instead of judgment, we're contributing to a more just and loving world.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the roots of judgment, the biblical perspective on compassion, and even some practical steps for cultivating more kindness in our lives.
Right.
But there's one more thing I want to highlight from the sources.
And what that?
It's this idea that compassion isn't just a feeling, you know?
Okay.
It's an action.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like we can't just sit around and, feel bad for someone.
Right.
We have to actually do something to help.
You're spot on. It's about moving beyond empathy, which is understanding someone's pain, and then taking that understanding and moving into compassion,
Oh, okay.
which is actually taking action.
Okay, so what does that look like in real life? Like what kind of actions are we talking about here?
Well, it could be so many different things.
Yeah.
It might be offering practical help to someone in need,
Right.
like volunteering at a soup kitchen or donating to a cause you care about.
Mm-hmm.
It could also mean speaking up against injustice when you see it.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's just being a listening ear for someone who's struggling.
And sometimes I think the most compassionate thing we can do is just to let go of judgment, to give people the space to make their own choices, even if we don't necessarily agree with them.
Such an important point.
Mhm.
It's about recognizing that everyone is on their own unique journey.
Yeah.
And we don't always have the right to interfere or impose our own beliefs on other people.
It's about respecting their autonomy,
Yeah.
their right to make their own mistakes and to learn from them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's interesting how this idea of non-judgment ties back to that biblical concept of grace.
Yeah.
Grace is about receiving unmerited favor, about being loved and accepted even when we don't deserve it.
And when we extend that same grace to other people, we're reflecting God's love in the world.
Exactly.
Well-
It's about creating this ripple effect of compassion,
Mhm.
starting with ourselves and then extending outward to touch the lives of everyone around us.
Who knows, maybe that ripple effect will eventually reach, the furthest corners of the earth,
Yeah,
transforming hearts and minds along the way.
I truly believe it can. Because at the end of the day, compassion is the most powerful force in the universe. It's that force that binds us together, that heals wounds, that breaks down barriers, and creates a more just and loving world for everyone.
Well said. So deep divers, as you go about your day today, remember that boundless love of God
Yes.
and let it inspire you to choose compassion over judgment in every interaction.
Remember, every act of kindness, every word of encouragement, every choice to see the good in others, it truly makes a difference.
And those differences, no matter how small they may seem, they can add up to create a world that's more loving, more just, and more beautiful for everyone. Keep diving deep, friends.
Oh, yeah.